Sean Hannity confesses finally. There's something disarming about watching a man who's built a career on hard facts and fierce debates suddenly open up about something deeply personal. Sean Hannity, one of America's most recognized voices in conservative media, did just that recently. At 63, after decades of political talk, primetime television, and headline-grabbing interviews, Hannity let his guard down to speak about something far more human than policy or power: love. His emotional confession about the woman he calls the love of my life didn't just surprise fans, it softened the sharp edges of a man many thought they already knew. But did they really?
I was a dishwasher at 12, a cook at 13, a busboy, a waiter, a bartender for a lot of years. Then I was a painting contractor. I hung wallpaper. I framed houses. I was doing construction. I'd listen to talk radio all day. And one day I'm in Santa Barbara, California, and I find out that the local college has...
Sean Patrick Hannity was born in Queens, New York in 1961, the youngest of 4 children in a close-knit Irish-American family. His father, Hugh, worked as a court officer, while his mother, Lillian, was a corrections officer at a county jail. It wasn't a life of luxury, but it was one grounded in discipline and community. Those who knew him as a boy say Sean had a stubborn streak, the kind of persistence that either drives parents crazy or leads to greatness later on. Growing up in Franklin Square, Long Island, he was just another neighborhood kid, working odd jobs, mowing lawns, and tinkering with anything he could get his hands on. But it was the sound of radio that first caught his imagination. Late nights, when most kids were asleep, Hannity would tune into talk radio, fascinated by how voices through a speaker could ignite an entire nation's conversation. By his early 20s, Hannity knew he didn't want a regular 9-to-5. He tried his hand at various jobs, construction, painting, even bartending, but his heart kept returning to the idea of a microphone and an audience. His first real break came when he landed a volunteer gig at a college radio station in California. It was small, unpolished, and unpaid, but to Sean, it was everything. From that tiny California station, Hannity moved to bigger markets, eventually hosting shows in Alabama and Georgia. His relentless drive caught the attention of producers who saw his potential beyond radio. The timing was perfect. America was entering an era when political talk shows were becoming cultural forces, and Hannity's bold style was exactly what networks were looking for. By 1996, his life changed overnight. Fox News, then an ambitious upstart network, tapped him to co-host a new program alongside liberal commentator Alan Colmes. The show, Hannity and Colmes, became an instant hit. Viewers were drawn to the tension, 2 ideologies colliding nightly, and Hannity thrived on it. He didn't just debate, he commanded to be heard. Years later, when the Sean Hannity Show launched as a solo program, his voice became one of the most recognized in America. He interviewed presidents, criticized policies, and sometimes courted controversy. But through it all, one thing stayed constant: his energy. Behind the camera, however, Hannity wasn't as loud. Friends and co-workers often describe him as surprisingly reserved off-air, someone who values loyalty, privacy, and faith. The persona that America saw every night was the broadcaster, but the man off-screen was deeply reflective. He'd often speak about his faith, his family, and the simple things he still missed from his childhood: Sunday dinners, his parents' voices, and the kind of honesty that only comes from humble beginnings. To many who knew him, it was clear that while Sean Hannity might thrive in chaos professionally, what he truly longed for was peace in his personal life. And that's where his story takes an unexpected turn.
I really am a believer that of myself, I could do nothing. I believe every single thing we have in this world is a gift from God.
Before the fame, before Fox News, Sean Hannity was just a young radio host trying to make it. And it was during those early years that he met the woman who would become a huge part of his life story, Jill Rhodes. Jill was a journalist working at a local newspaper in Huntsville, Alabama, when she first heard Hannity's voice on the radio. He would call her up for story tips, and soon those professional calls turned into personal ones. They were both young, ambitious, and hungry to make their mark. There was a spark, one that quickly grew into something more. In 1993, they got married. It wasn't a lavish ceremony. It was simple, heartfelt, and filled with the optimism of 2 people ready to face the world together. Hannity often credited Jill for being his grounding force, the calm to his storm. As his career grew, so did their family. They welcomed their first child, a son named Patrick, in 1998, and 3 years later, their daughter Mary Kelly was born. Those who knew Hannity during those years often saw a different side of him. The father who showed up to tennis matches, the husband who made sure his family stayed close no matter how busy his schedule got. Yet, being in the public eye always comes at a cost. The long hours, the constant travel, and the scrutiny of fame began to take their toll. As Hannity's career exploded, his marriage quietly started to fray at the edges. He never spoke publicly about it, he never does. But insiders close to the couple say that years of living under a microscope slowly built an invisible wall between them. By 2019, after more than 2 decades together, Sean and Jill decided to part ways. The divorce was finalized quietly, without the drama or scandal that usually follows celebrity breakups. They issued no bitter statements, no tell-all interviews, just 2 people who had shared a life deciding to go their separate ways. But if you look closely, that silence said a lot. It showed respect, not just for each other, but for their children. Even after the separation, Hannity and Rhodes continued to co-parent with remarkable grace. Their kids remained their top priority, and friends say Hannity stayed deeply involved in their lives. For Patrick, his father's presence was constant, especially during his tennis career at Wake Forest University. And for Mary, Hannity was the supportive dad who always made time for her sports and academic pursuits. Privately, though, that period was difficult for Sean. He was a man used to control of conversations, of narratives, of public opinion. But love isn't something you can control, and loss can't be debated away. Those who worked with him noticed a subtle shift during that time. The man who once filled every silence with certainty began speaking a little slower, thinking a little deeper. He started spending more time in reflection, leaning into his faith and the quiet corners of his personal life. Friends say he became more private than ever, not reclusive but protective. He stopped talking about relationships altogether, avoiding even lighthearted questions about dating on air. To many, it seemed like Sean Hannity had decided that love just wasn't for him anymore. But behind that guarded exterior, something else was happening. A slow, quiet rediscovery of what love could look like the second time around. He had walked through the rise and fall of fame, the highs of success, and the sting of heartbreak. He had built a career that demanded every ounce of his attention, and had learned that not everything in life can be managed like a broadcast schedule. So when, years later, he spoke about finding the love of his life at 63, it hit differently.
No, Sean Hannity's a conservative. There's no pretense here. I'm not Ted Koppel. I am a person, it's branded, this is a conservative show.
I really am a believer that of myself, I could do nothing. I believe every single thing we have in this world is a gift.
After his marriage ended, Sean Hannity didn't make any grand announcements or public statements. He simply kept doing what he had always done, showing up. Every night, millions tuned in to see him deliver sharp political analysis and unflinching commentary. But off camera, his world had gone quiet. Those who knew him best say that he started prioritizing moments over milestones. He reconnected with old friends, devoted time to his children's pursuits, and even took up hobbies that had nothing to do with politics or television. For a man whose life revolved around constant deadlines, that shift was huge. But make no mistake, Hannity's career never slowed. His show continued to dominate, ranking among the most listened-to programs in America. His nightly television show remained a ratings powerhouse, yet there was something about him that seemed different. The fiery tone was still there, but underneath it was a man learning balance. He once hinted in an offhand remark that he'd learned the importance of gratitude, the quiet appreciation for the things that truly matter: health, faith, family, and peace. He no longer seemed interested in chasing validation. For someone who had spent decades in the storm of American media, that realization was monumental. In those quiet years, Hannity built a routine that centered on consistency. Early mornings, a workout, time in prayer, and then straight into work. Colleagues said he became almost monk-like in discipline. He didn't date publicly, didn't attend high-profile parties, didn't indulge the rumor mill. He guarded his privacy fiercely, but beneath that disciplined exterior, there was still a longing, not necessarily for romance, but for companionship, the kind that makes you feel seen when the cameras are off. After all, no matter how successful, no one is immune to loneliness. And for Hannity, who had built a fortress around his private life, letting someone back in wasn't going to be easy. What he didn't know was that the next chapter of his story was already waiting in the same building, someone who had walked her own road of love, loss, and resilience.
You ended up getting a divorce,
Right.
but your faith kept you very strong throughout it.
Yeah, that was a really hard period in my life, but we are amicable and we co-parent very well. My name is Ainsley Earhart, and I have worked at Fox News for 14 years.
Ainsley Earhart wasn't just another television personality. She was someone who had carved her own name in the demanding world of broadcast journalism. A South Carolina native, Ainsley brought a sense of grace and positivity to her work, quickly rising through the ranks to become one of Fox's most beloved morning hosts. Behind that bright smile and calm composure, though, was a woman who had endured her share of heartbreak. She had gone through 2 marriages that didn't last and was raising her young daughter, Hayden, as a single mom. Her faith had become her compass, something that kept her steady through all of life's turbulence. In many ways, Sean and Ainsley's paths mirrored each other. Both were veterans of the same network, both had weathered public scrutiny, and both were learning what it meant to rebuild their personal lives after loss. The chemistry between them started quietly, rooted in friendship. They had known each other professionally for years, crossing paths in the Fox studios, but somewhere along the way, something shifted. Conversations that once revolved around work began to feel more personal. Ainsley admired Sean's discipline, his dedication to his children, and his faith. Sean admired her strength, her warmth, and her unwavering positivity. There was mutual respect. It wasn't long before colleagues began to notice. They often traveled in the same circles, sometimes appearing at events together. But even as whispers began to swirl, both Hannity and Earhart remained tight-lipped. They never confirmed nor denied anything, choosing to keep their relationship out of the spotlight. For Sean, that was deliberate. After living through the scrutiny of a public marriage, he wasn't eager to invite the world into his heart again. But those close to him noticed how different he seemed when Ainsley was around. He laughed more. He was lighter. She brought out a gentleness that rarely showed on screen. Their shared values became the foundation of their bond: faith, family, and the belief that everything in life happens in its own time. They began attending church together, often sitting quietly in the back, blending in with the congregation. It wasn't flashy romance, no red carpets, no magazine covers, but it was real. They built a connection grounded in understanding rather than spectacle. When Ainsley began hosting her Bible study segments, Sean became one of her most supportive colleagues. He'd praise her insights on air and encourage viewers to tune in. Privately, he'd tell friends how much he admired her outlook, how she managed to stay kind in a world that rewards confrontation. What drew them together wasn't opposites attracting, but similarities aligning. They were both public figures with private hearts, both searching for something genuine in an industry built on appearances. Their relationship, though quiet, began to evolve into something deeper. And while neither of them felt the need to label it publicly, everyone who saw them together could sense it. For Hannity, who had spent years shielding his emotions, this connection was healing. For Ainsley, it was a reminder that even after heartbreak, love has a way of finding you when you least expect it. Then came the moment that changed everything. The confession that would make headlines and remind everyone watching that even the most guarded hearts can still find courage in love.
Ainsley Earhart, you were with us at the, first of all, congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
It wasn't during a political broadcast or a scripted interview. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, the kind of moment that sneaks up on you and lingers. Sean Hannity, known for his confidence and composure, was speaking more softly than usual. His tone wasn't the booming certainty of a man defending his beliefs. It was the gentle honesty of someone revealing a truth he'd kept to himself for a long time. He began talking about gratitude, about the people who stand by you when life gets messy. Then, almost seamlessly, his words turned personal. He mentioned finding someone who understood him, someone who had been there through the highs and lows, someone he called the love of my life. For a moment, the usually fiery host looked human, Not the political commentator, not the media powerhouse, just a man, at 63, acknowledging the beauty of second chances. Viewers were stunned. It wasn't that they didn't think Hannity had emotions. It was that they'd never seen him reveal them so openly. He had always kept that part of himself under lock and key, rarely mentioning family, never discussing relationships. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. Those who had followed his journey knew exactly who he was talking about. The timing, the tenderness in his words, it all pointed toward Ainsley. And it wasn't just the words that made the moment powerful. It was the sincerity, the pauses, the subtle smile that crossed his face when he said, "At this stage in my life, I'm just grateful. I've found someone who makes me better every single day." That line alone became a turning point, not just in how the public saw Sean Hannity, but in how he saw himself. Gone was the man who once hid behind his work. In his place stood someone who had lived long enough to know that real strength comes from vulnerability. What's clear is that, at 63, Sean Hannity has entered a new season of life. For a man who has spent decades debating the state of the nation, it turns out his most meaningful revelation wasn't political at all. It was personal. It was about realizing that love doesn't follow a timeline, that it doesn't care about public opinion, and that sometimes the best things in life happen quietly, away from the cameras.
Hey guys, by the way, thank you so much for inviting little old me into your great Bible study. I could always use more prayers. We all live in the greatest country God gave man.
With Sean Hannity's confession, it rippled far beyond his usual audience. Viewers who had followed him for years were caught off guard. There was no spin, no headline-grabbing declaration, just honesty. It was rare to see a man who built his career on being impenetrable show that kind of tenderness. The media world reacted quickly. Some called it unexpected, others refreshing. And for many fans, it was humanizing, making him more relatable. Professionally, his honesty didn't hurt his reputation. It deepened it. In an age when authenticity is rare, the moment reminded people that vulnerability isn't weakness. For many of his longtime supporters, it made them feel even closer to him. And for Sean himself, it seemed to mark a personal turning point. The guardedness that once defined him began to soften. He didn't suddenly become an open book. He's still private by nature. But there was a noticeable warmth, a calmness that came from knowing that love was no longer something to hide. At 63, he wasn't chasing reinvention. He was embracing reality, one filled with gratitude, companionship, and the quiet confidence that comes from being loved for who you are, not what you do. And that was perhaps the most profound part of his confession. It wasn't just a personal revelation. It was a reminder that even those who seem larger than life are still searching for the same simple truths, connection, acceptance, and love that stands the test of time. Sean Hannity's story isn't just about rediscovering love at an older age. It's about the courage to begin again. The first lesson in his story is that it's never too late to find happiness. Hannity's confession came at 63, an age when many people assume their story has already been written. Yet his journey shows that life continues to surprise us, that love doesn't have an expiration date, and that joy can appear long after the storm has passed. The second lesson is about vulnerability. In a world where strength is often equated with stoicism, Hannity's openness showed that true strength sometimes lies in letting your guard down. By admitting his feelings, he didn't lose authority, he gained depth. He reminded millions that showing emotion doesn't erase toughness, it amplifies it. Then there's the lesson about gratitude. Hannity didn't frame his love story as a grand victory. He framed it as a blessing. He spoke like a man who had learned the hard way that success means little if you have no one to share it with. That sense of appreciation, after all he'd been through, made his confession moving. And perhaps the most important takeaway is this: people change. The Sean Hannity the world saw 20 years ago isn't the same man standing before the cameras today. He's evolved, from fiery and restless to reflective and thankful. If there's one thing Hannity's confession made clear, it's that the human heart doesn't retire. It keeps hoping, keeps searching, and sometimes, when the timing is finally right, it finds what it's been looking for all along: love.